The Shaping Opinion podcast is brought to you by O'Brien Communications, an independent corporate communications firm. O'Brien Communications helps clients of all sizes with corporate communications and strategic planning, marketing communications, public relations and media relations, content development and writing, and crisis and issues management. Learn more at o'briencommunications.com. Can you describe the morning of September 11th, 2001 for you?
Yes, I had driven up to Erie, Pennsylvania with about 10 or 11 other FBI agents from the Pittsburgh division. Erie is a small satellite office outside of Pittsburgh. It answers to Pittsburgh. We were doing some training, some specific training. We started and we were going on, and then an agent interrupted the training. We had a number, the assistant special agent in charge was the highest person on scene, was also taking the training with us. And someone came into the room and said, I need to let the ASAC Corvington know that a plane just ran into one of the Twin Towers in New York City. So we started talking about it a little bit, and then the decision was made that there's nothing we can do. It could very well, they didn't know what size the airplane was at the time. They didn't know anything. We don't know what it is. It could very well be an accident. So let's continue doing what we're doing, and then we'll finish. Within minutes, a second plane hit, and immediately said the training is over. Everybody get in your cars and get back to Pittsburgh. Turn on your lights and sirens and get down to Pittsburgh as soon as possible.
I'm Tim O'Brien. In this episode of the Shaping Opinion podcast, we're joined by Bill Crowley. He's a professor of justice, law, and security at La Roche College. On September 11, 2001, he was a special agent with the FBI based in Pittsburgh. He became the FBI's spokesperson and crisis communicator when United Flight 93 was hijacked by terrorists and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The premise of our podcast is simple. We talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Today we're going to talk with Bill about what it was like to handle crisis communications as part of the FBI during one of the worst crises in American history. It's been 17 years since America experienced the deadliest terrorist attack on its soil. 4 commercial jetliners were hijacked by members of al-Qaeda. The first 2 jets flew into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. These were American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175. Another jet slammed into the western side of the U.S. Pentagon. This was American Airlines Flight 77. A 4th plane never made it to its intended target. United Airlines Flight 93 crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. It has been widely reported that terrorist attack failed because the crew and the passengers of Flight 93 fought back. At the end of the day, 3,000 people were killed. In Shanksville, the dead numbered 33 passengers, 7 crew, and 4 terrorists. Bill Crowley, the special agent who served as the FBI spokesperson immediately following the crash in Shanksville, had a view of this crisis like no one else. This is our conversation. What happened once you got back to Pittsburgh?
Well, we're driving. I just remember driving, and any time you're doing something like that, you're obviously looking for information. So that you can prepare. It's about, I was going probably anywhere from 80 to 100 miles an hour during the entire drive down there. So I was spinning looking on the radio dial, looking for any news, so I could try to get a sense of what was going on. And as I'm driving, I'm hearing these different. I'm hearing these different events. I'm hearing the Pentagon, and then I heard about Flight 93, which landed in Somerset. That was really, not that I wasn't completely absorbed, but when I heard about Somerset, Pennsylvania, that completely got my attention. Because the way the Bureau works, we work in areas of responsibility, like most organizations. And the Pittsburgh division is responsible for the western half of Pennsylvania and the entire state of West Virginia. Somerset falls into the jurisdiction or the cover area of responsibility of Pittsburgh. If it had been a couple of miles to the east, it would have been the responsibility of the Philadelphia division. It would have been, call it the Office of Origin. So that became a Pittsburgh division case. It was our responsibility to manage it, to send all of our resources out there. So that information, I was trying to get that information flow and trying to think about things that I should be doing or I would be doing in the near future. Obviously, my responsibility, I knew, was going to be with dealing with the media on this and trying to deal with this crisis. Also, because it was multiple locations, I was going to be working extremely closely with our headquarters and making sure that they were completely in the loop with everything that I did, in addition to my management in the Pittsburgh division.
Bill, when you arrived on the scene in Shanksville, aside from your duties, what was your first impression?
The thing that really struck me when I drove up, and it was actually kind of difficult to find because it was a rural area and the roads weren't really well marked, and it was basically just farmland. And I found myself having to be really careful following directions and getting there. This was before Garmin and before having GPS. So eventually I found it, and it was in the middle of a field. There was some tents that were being built, and obviously a lot of activity. So I used I identified myself to be able to get inside the perimeter, and then I started talking, and then immediately was introduced to other members of other government agencies, specifically the state police. State police had the biggest, they had over 500 troopers on scene over the course of the next couple of weeks. So they were obviously a big, major player at the scene. It was a crime scene. And I remember being taken up to a bluff that overlooked where the plane impacted. And it reminded me a little bit of what had happened was that the plane had augured in, and I think it had gone about 40 to 60 feet into the under the surface. And this was a reclaimed mining area, so the ground was relatively soft, considering there wasn't rocks or anything like that. It had been dug up, so it could go in a little bit further than normal. And what it did was it displaced a tremendous amount of dirt that had gone into the air, and a lot of papers and a lot of things. Now this is hours, this is actually a day after. I didn't get there on 9/11. I actually got there the day after. And it was fairly calm. It was a beautiful day. It was a beautiful September day, and it was eerily quiet. And everything was covered with dirt, and from a distance, we were probably about a quarter to a half mile away, I was like, where's the plane? And they really couldn't tell that a plane had crashed there. It was amazing.
You had gotten there after some of the people had been working on the recovery effort. How would you describe the emotional impact on the people on the scene?
I think at the time people were there, one of the things that work when you're a first responder, when you're involved in EMTs or police officers or anybody involved in that type of work, what happens is your training takes over, and you tend not to be thinking about about the impact. You're there to do a job. You're not there to see things and to feel them or whatever. And my job was to get up there, assess the situation, and then try to come up with, working with the partners, coming up with a way to deal with the press, because obviously it was world news and people wanted to know what was going on and they wanted the answers as soon as possible. So it was I was focused on that. I was trying to understand who was there, who was going to be talking, whether I was going to be in a role where I was going to be getting information, providing information for one of our on-scene commanders, or was I going to be doing it myself, which is what they ended up deciding, because there was so much that had to be done and they didn't want to be distracted with doing press conferences. So I was the one that fell to be my responsibility, that I was going to get in front of the cameras along with I think it was a major in the state police, a very high-ranking state police official, and we had other officials as well. So we just were having a lot of meetings and just trying to figure things out. What did we have? How are we going to do it? And the ultimate primary responsibility was that this was a crime scene, and then we had to work at just like any other crime scene that you have. And I had been involved, our evidence response team, kind of like I think most people know of crime scene, CSI, those shows. In the FBI, the teams are called evidence response teams. And we actually teach a very good course here at LaRoche, and we have one of our instructor here, our professor, was actually at the scene, and so we have some really talented people. The Pittsburgh team had gone over a few years earlier to Kosovo, and had actually worked at some crime scenes where they're reconstructing for the International Criminal Tribunal, some execution scenes where women and children have been executed. So they've been used to flying over to military transport, having all their equipment, and then plopping down in a foreign country, and then doing their job. And I remember Bob Craig, who was one of our team leaders at the time. Bob said that, anytime you do a crime scene, it's like a recipe for a cook. If you're cooking something, you have to do the same steps. It doesn't matter the size. You do the same steps every time. It just you increase the scale based on the size, obviously, but the same steps have to be followed. And that was something that was, to me anyways, it helped me when I thought about that, because all it is just another crime scene, and we just have to do our job, and we have to focus on that. And you really couldn't worry, and again, that's why we have all that training, so people don't come apart and they don't start to reflect on, Jesus, what about this, what about that, what does this mean? Well, no, the best thing we can do is actually have something to do and go in and focus on it.
You have to trust the process.
Absolutely.
Speaking of the process, you had a process in place. A lot of times if this happens to an organization, they look at their crisis plan. Did you follow what might be described as a crisis plan to the letter? Did you look to and I'll go through a couple of the steps of a crisis, and you can tell me if you deviated from this, but one of the first things you do is you find out what you know, then you find out what you don't know. Mm-hmm. Then you start to establish this network of sources for information that you're going to need. And soon you pick a spokesperson, and you just describe that. Then right after that, you want to put a schedule together and a means for communication. So you want to basically decide, when is our press conference going to be? How frequently are we going to have them? And what other means do we need to use to communicate? Did you have that process in place? Did you go right back to that?
Well, I think your training will always come back, and what you just described is exactly how it broke down. But to be honest with you, I always think whenever I hear about plans, especially when you put a crisis plan together, I think of the quote from Mike Tyson, which is, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. It was a punch in the face. And you're reacting, and then you start thinking, okay, what I need to understand who's in the room, and I need to understand what their objectives are, what their needs are. And I also know that no one organization is going to be able to do what we need to do here. This is going to have to be a team effort, and we're going to need everybody. And as I said, the state police had 500 troopers there. That's pretty incredible, and that was for 10 days. So I certainly wanted to make sure that they had what they needed, and we also had a lot of other state organizations. We had local, we had paramedics, we had some federal agencies that were flying, NTSB, so that they could identify where the flight recorder device was. These are all critical people that had critical roles. And sometimes I worry about plans, because I think if they're too specific, all of a sudden you start focusing on, well, I got to do it this way. I can't. You have to kind of adapt. Now, having said that, absolutely identify what our issues are, and we knew right away that we knew we weren't going to get a day. So they actually had, the first day was some type of a press conference where they put people out. And then they said, well, this is what's going on. This is, we'll have more for you later. It's in its infancy, which is a term that you try to use a lot in these situations. You don't know. But it's important that you get out there as a representative of this situation and say, we're starting a process. We have a process, and we're going to use it. But right now, we don't have a lot to give you, other than this is where we're moving forward. We'll have more for you the next time. I think the big thing that we decided that was important was that we decided early on that we should probably do something in the morning and then do something in the afternoon. And I believe we did I think it was 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. So we scheduled them regularly. At that point, we had virtually every news outlet in the country, especially the major news outlets, all the locals. And they were going, our press conferences were going live everywhere. I didn't find out till later, but when I talked to our headquarters, they told me that, well, really nobody else, New York is not talking. Rudy Giuliani is speaking for New York appropriately as the mayor. Well, the FBI, I don't know that he would want them to, and they certainly would prefer that he do it. And it's what he was paid to do. And in the Pentagon, I believe it was, the military. I'm really not sure if anyone spoke there. So he said, essentially, as far as the FBI is concerned, you're the only one that's speaking. So that kind of staggered me a little bit. That was another Mike Tyson right cross. Okay, there is nobody else speaking. You're it. And that was one major, obviously, disadvantage from that perspective. The major advantage that we had, we were in a rural area. It was very easy to control the environment from a law enforcement, first responder perspective. And that's where the state police came in. They set up a perimeter. Whenever you set up a crime scene, you have to push it out so that you can make sure that no evidence is going to be contaminated. So they kept pushing it out, and I think it was about a 4 or 5 mile radius. It kept them. It was a significant radius. I'm not sure how long it was. And they were able to say, no one is allowed to cross here. Now, this was in a rural area, so you had woods, you had fields, you had all sorts. It wasn't like we were displacing someone from their homes, or it was, for the most part, it was just uninhabited area. So that was fairly easy to do, relatively speaking. And we had a lot of control over it, so that we were able to control the flow of information. Where if you think about Lower Manhattan or D.C., there's just so much going on, and it's just tying up the two major cities on the East Coast. Very, very different environment.
Within that perimeter, though, you did have control issues, and that would be another big issue in your case, a big challenge. And that is, you had the state police. You had all these other organizations. You had news organizations that wanted access. How did you control the flow of information? How did you keep people from talking to the media? And for that reason, how did you control the flow of rumors and misinformation?
Well, that was the purpose of the twice daily press briefings. From my perspective, I'm at the site from 7 a.m. until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I got a hotel right off the turnpike, which is about 6 or 7 miles away. I'd go there late at night, get a couple of hours sleep, and then I was back there all day. So I had no idea what was going on. I was completely down the rabbit hole in Shanksville. I had no concept of what was going on, just vaguely in the other two crash sites. And I remember having a conversation, or during a press conference, questions being asked, well, what other planes were up at the time? And there seemed to be very pointed questions. And I didn't really know, and I remember at the press conference thinking, I'm not sure where they're getting at, but I need to find out, because these questions are a little bit too specific, and I don't have the right answers. And I remember going right to the reporter right after the press conference, said, what's your point? This is not on my radar. And he said, well, there's a lot of people now are saying that this federal government shot the plane out of the air. We were able to go back and find out, and I believe there was I think it was a corporate jet. That was not really, it was only my concern when the mainstream press during the press conferences were starting to ask pointed questions about it. And that's when I said, okay, I've got to address this. And so that was about the only time I had a wild rumor, at least at that location, that I tried to actively try to put facts out.
There were many credible reports after that said that should the plane have gotten closer to Washington, they might have had to shoot it down, but thank God they didn't have to do that.
As a citizen, I think that's something they would have had to have thought of. Mm-hmm. But I also remember something which really struck me. And again, this was like 2-3 weeks later when I was back in Pittsburgh, and I started trying to catch up on some of the other things that happened and reading some accounts. And I believe it was Vice President Cheney when they said that the plane went down, and he said America just fought back, or words to that effect. And I thought about it, and then I have heard the voice, I think most people have who want to, but I'd heard it about 4 or 5 days afterwards, and I remember that you could hear slamming into the cockpit, and you could hear the
The struggle.
So that's based on the knowledge that I have. I've heard nothing to shake my confidence in what the official version is.
One of the things you mentioned that I think nobody plans for in crisis communications is that oftentimes the media becomes one of our more credible intelligence sources. We have to get information from reporters. You don't like to plan for that. It's never been in a crisis plan that I've ever seen. Yet at the same time, in a lot of crises, media people are who we turn to get information.
Absolutely. And they're a rich source of information, and they can help you tremendously. And I think an example being going up to the reporter and not knowing. I knew he had something that he was trying to flesh out, and there's no wall. You can go right up to them, and I don't care whether it's on the record or not. What's your point here? What is it? Because I can't help you if I don't know what it is that you're getting at. And then he told me, I'm getting a lot of people. We're hearing a lot of people now saying specifically, and I said, okay, I'll find out. There was no point. I didn't care one way or the other if that had happened that way, but I sure as heck wanted to know, and I wanted to be able to convey my biggest message was to be accurate as I could be, because if I told something that was an untruth or a half-truth, and my credibility, then they wouldn't trust me to go forward.
Well, you made another good point there, and that is you didn't care if it was on the record or not, and that is usually the case when we talk to the media. It's always on the record.
Yeah.
So it's good to have this back and forth as long as we know it's on the record. One of the other things that I wanted to ask you was, at a time like that, you had all of those things happening at the same time. What information resources or even what communications resources were most valuable to you during that time?
Well, I was getting direct status reports. We were getting direct status reports. So the one thing the one area that was helpful for me was that I was a known entity, at least for my leadership, for the FBI, so that they made sure that I was involved in any kind of briefings that were going on of what was happening. And so I was getting the daily, we've recovered this amount of the plane, or we've recovered that. And what I always looked for was something quantifiable that I could report. And I believe I broke it down by we believe we've recovered 30% of the plane at this point. We have not found the voice recorder device. We haven't done this, we haven't done that. And it became evident to me that we were running out of things to tell them because we had a controlled environment. They were required to be there, the press. Their objective was, well, this is an international incident of terrorism. Over 40 people died here, were murdered here. We're not leaving, and we have to continue. And the one thing that I thought about it, and I tried to, and I wasn't sure of what their specific objective was. And I thought about it, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go ask them. So around, I think it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon between our press conferences, I went into the trailers. And again, it was just this little town that sprung up overnight, media town, where you had about 7 or 8. It's CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, all lined up. And so I just went in, knocked on the door, went in, and there was the producer there, and they were just shocked. What the heck's this guy doing here? And I just say, look, what are you looking for? How long? What are you being told by your headquarters? How long are you going to be here? What is it? Because we're running out of things. It was more of a coming together to say, as opposed to an adversarial situation, try to understand what their needs were, and then for them to tell me what it was that they were trying to do so that I could report back to our management and to the state police and all the other people I was responsible to. This is what they're looking for. How about if we try this? If you understand what the other side wants, the press wants or needs, then you can figure out a solution, and then maybe they can get what they want to move on. And it ended up being what they really wanted was the voice recorder. They wanted to be able to be there when that was recovered.
When was that recovered?
I believe it was, Tuesday was 9/11, and I believe it was Friday the 14th. I'm pretty sure it was Friday the 14th, which is my son's birthday.
You would remember that.
Yeah.
How would you describe the news cycle then, going from Tuesday, September 11th, to that discovery of the voice recorder?
Well, it was every two press conferences a day. And that took, it wasn't on the 11th, I think pretty much the 12th, 13th, and 14th. So it was fairly quick. And we would provide them with information. And one of the things that I was paying attention by going to these meetings, and then when we would get some specialists would be introduced to the effort. Specifically, I remember Dennis Dirkmatt, who's a professor. I think he's at Mercyhurst. I'm not sure which college. It's north of Pittsburgh. And Dennis is an expert at excavation, and he's a talented guy, and he's got the Bureau has a very good relationship with him and uses him. Called in to be able to assist, and I asked him if he would, he was asked, not necessarily by me, but he was asked to sit in on the press conference and explain his purpose for being there, which gives the media something to talk about. It's something different. It's an academic. It's a person who can explain what he's doing. It gives them something so that they can report. The reporters have something to write about or to discuss, and it took the pressure off us to talk about what's going on with the investigation. Because, again, even though it was 3 days and we had we had over 100 people, evidence response trained people working that site, it was a challenge.
One of the things that you just described is symptomatic of these types of situations where you have the major event, which was the terrorist attacks. Then after that, there are a series of smaller events, press conferences, and then the discovery of the data recorder. And then in between those events, there is a business aspect to the media. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all of these 24/7 cable news channels, they know their viewers want to know what's going on, so they fill that time, and they look for filler, but they also look for background. And it's almost therapeutic for the viewers. The reason they want to watch is because they want to come to terms with this, so they can't get enough information. So to your point, when you bring these experts in for background, even though they're not delivering hard news, they're helping the viewers, they're helping the public come to terms with the whole event, don't you think?
Absolutely, because you can't, it's fairly fundamental. You're there to gather evidence, and you're there to dig things up and to preserve them, and then and give you clues and information to help you, because it was a law enforcement, it was a crime scene. And therefore, the rules of evidence apply, all that. And it's not a simple procedure to go into a plane that crashes in a field in a rural area and do that type of work. And to help the viewers or help people who are interested understand the process has a lot of value, because, as you said, it also, people like Dennis, they're talented people, and they're very dedicated, and that comes across if you put them on TV, and so it worked out. I thought it was a way to go, but at the same time, I was also made it very clear to our management, they're going to be here, and we're going to have to do this until we get those boxes and get them, and we need to let them know that we got them too, because and it did happen, as soon as that was reported, as soon as they were discovered and we reported it, they were gone. The national networks left pretty much. They kept skeleton crews, and for our purposes, we were able to scale back the press coverage to one press conference a day. I think it actually may have gone to every other day, and it was able to, that pressure valve released. The other thing that, again, it was unprecedented, but where we have this major event that we're working, and all sorts of resources are being sent to Shanksville to work with it, and we were the least important story regarding that, because you had Lower Manhattan with the visuals and all the visuals that were there, and the Pentagon, and you just have a rural area. There are very few photos of anything. I mean, I think there may be 2 or 3 photos of a couple of clouds of dust clouds that popped up. It didn't have the impact. It didn't capture the imagination that the others did. Again, from a perspective of managing it and doing our job to let the public know what we're doing, but not having it turn into a real issue that a lot of resources have to be diverted to.
You said the news media, once the data recorder was discovered, the national media left town. How long did you stick around Shanksville? And then after that, how much time did you spend on this whole story from your offices in Pittsburgh?
I believe the last day I left was the 24th. And essentially it was more of a changing of the guard, because we were processing the scene. And I stayed as long as the FBI was there and it was considered a crime scene. I was there. And I was there, and I believe it was the 24th. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was the 24th, which I believe was a Monday morning. And we changed it it was officially went from being a crime scene to a death scene. And the person responsible was the county coroner Wally Miller, I think and Wally became the primary spokesperson. I mean, it was his responsibility after that. And, whatever this means, but we had incredible weather. It was just every day was in the 70s, and it was sunny, and we were able to do work. The day we transitioned, it was a driving rainstorm. And that's a very vivid memory that I have.
You said that this story was probably the least noticed story of the other crash sites, but there's sort of an irony there because there were so many stories. There were 3,000 stories of the people who died. There were the stories of all the rescuers, the people in the New York Police Department, New York Fire Department, the rescuers at Shanksville and at the Pentagon. So there are so many stories, but some of the stories that stuck out the most after that day, maybe far after that day, was what happened on that airplane before it crashed and the people who fought back. You've had time to think about it now. What do you think about what happened on the airplane?
Well, I mean, the Vice President Cheney crystallized my thoughts on it. Was when it took America. However, I believe it was 9:43 is when they as a time on the 11th when they said the plane impacted in Shanksville. That's what sticks in my head, 9:43. So it was about 45 minutes later, America was already fighting back.
How do you think Shanksville fit into the grander scheme of things on 9/11?
Well, there's one, as I mentioned earlier, I really didn't know. I was hyper-focused on what I was doing, and I was every waking moment was about Shanksville and about how we could do our job as efficiently as possible. And it really struck me was that I think it was a few days after the crash, I was in between press conferences. I had done for our morning press conference, and normally I would run up to our command post and then start gathering information for the afternoon press conference. And one of the reporters for CNN said, "I'd like to go live with you for 2 minutes. And I want to go over what you said. I want to focus on this." I said, "Sure." I said, "But I'm in a little bit of a hurry." And he said, "No, well, this will be great. We'll go really quickly and we'll be on your way." And he's standing there and he kept saying, "Well, I've got him here. He's ready to go, and I've got him, it's great. He's got something really good to say, and it'll be good." And he's arguing with his producer, and they had other things that were going on at the other two sites. And I'm sitting there, and I went on live on national TV before. I was doing it on a daily basis. It didn't mean very much to me. Normally, it would mean a lot when I was doing my regular duties. And I remember looking at the guy and saying, "Look, you got to make this happen. I got to get out of here. I got to go. If you want me to be able to say something interesting at 4:00, I got to get back up and start working on that." And he kept saying it's and he finally gave up and he said, "Let's just tape it." He said, and then he looked at me and he said, "We've got a crash site. We've got an international terrorism incident on U.S. soil. We have 44 people dead, and I can't get 30 seconds live."
That puts everything into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely made me realize that this was way beyond just a field in Western PA.
When did it hit you that this was history?
I started. I think the thought crossed my mind while I was there that this was the baby boomers. Pearl Harbor, that this would be something that would be impactful, that it would change a lot. And I just realizing how, when you work in law enforcement, you have to have a sense of you can be scared to death inside, but you've got to project strength and you've got to project competence. And I just remember seeing a lot of people doing that, but doing it, and I knew that they were hitting the red zone. They were completely expending all their energy to do that and to push forward and to work, working incredibly long hours and pushing through. And I just realized that this is a transformative. Again, we all have these thoughts and we don't know, but the reason I remembered it was because it certainly changed how the FBI did business. And I think Director Mueller very quickly realized that we were going to have to change how we did business. And instead of waiting for something to happen, we were going to have to prevent it, which is very difficult to do in law enforcement and in intelligence. It's the job to do it that way, but it's extremely difficult to do. The other thing that really struck me that this was different was, I worked the entire time under Director Mueller's 12 years, and he was the right man at the right time in history for us, for the FBI to transform into what it is today. And I remember reading the book Bush at War. He was interviewed, and he was at Camp David, and he was sitting behind the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, and he thought he was just there. He had, I think, about a week in the job, and the president, all right, Mueller, what's the FBI doing about this? And it was described that he got up and he realized that he was just mumbling for 30 seconds, and it was he realized that he just wasn't prepared for this. Even though he had been on the job for 7 days and he was still trying to find out where the bathrooms were, the president was now asking him in a time of crisis, what was the FBI doing, and he couldn't answer it. And according to the book, he said, I'm never going to be unprepared for something like this again. And he started briefing the president. And again, I'm just keep reading. I don't know this personally. This is from the book, but he was responsible for briefing the president right after George Tenet, the CIA director. And he had a half an hour every day. What's happening today?
How did things change at the FBI after 9/11?
We just, I think the Bureau became much more proactive. It just had to reach out, and it had to be smarter, better, had to share information better. And as someone, I stayed doing media relations for the FBI for another 8 or 9 years afterwards. And I remember going to a conference where Director Mueller spoke, and I remember him saying, our job now is in prevention. It's now in, we have to project. We just can't deal with what happened. We have to project. And from a media perspective, he said, it's okay for us to do our job and to let other people get in front of the cameras, and we don't have to be on the cameras anymore. And I want you to realize that no one's going to criticize you if the Bureau isn't front and center. Our job is to take care of, keep the American people safe. And that was when you bring in every single media coordinator into D.C. for a week of training, and the last person to speak is the director, and he gives you that message. It was pretty powerful.
Bill Crowley, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Make sure to check out our show notes for more information on everything that we talked about today. You'll find a bio on our guest, Bill Crowley, and you'll find more information about his work at La Roche College, along with detailed information on September 11th and Flight 93. You can also listen to other episodes. And don't miss our next episode. You can subscribe to the Shaping Opinion podcast in many ways, and they're all free and easy to find on your favorite podcast channel and at shapingopinion.com. This is where we talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Until next time, I'm Tim O'Brien.